welcome to another video. I'm mental health carer Matthew McKenzie. Feel free to check out my website or blog site regarding mental health carers, mental health in general, psychology, and so on. Now, it's been quite a succession for raising awareness on mental health. Just a few days ago, I've just actually completed a video for Eating Disorders Awareness Week 2016. But usually for the 1st of March, we now have Self-Injury Awareness Day, which obviously comes after February, or SIAD for short. And before I continue, what is self-injury or self-harm? Now remember, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm just a mental health carer, so I'm going to be as basic as I can. Self-harm is basically when someone actually harms themselves, usually on purpose, but not always. I'm not actually going to describe how people can harm themselves. I don't think that's the best way to go about it. But it can risk their life if help is not sought and things become chronic or critical. Now, many things can bring on self-harm, and it could be alcohol or drug use or abuse, perhaps low self-esteem, even a life choice, or someone feeling very low in themselves, severe depression, guilt, and more. But it needn't be those that I've mentioned, it could be other things. Some say self-harm is attention seeking, and it is actually possible. It really is, but I do believe the majority of cases can again be a cry for help, or those who just unfortunately cannot actually help what they do. It's something that they feel compelled to do. I'm actually not a self-harm survivor myself, but I have experienced those who have self-harm, and this the reason I felt that they self-harm is because they've been through some difficult experiences and they just could not know how to cope in any other way. In fact, from what I've noticed, someone self-harm because they just wanted to distract their mind away from that horrible experience that they've went through, mainly because what was happening in their mind, what they've experienced, was just going round and round in their mind, and they felt, look, I have to try and find something to just stop me thinking about this. But I'm going to actually point out a few sites, a few organizations that are worth checking out for more in-depth information regarding what self-harm is, or what it could be, or coping with self-harm and trying to dispel self-harm myths or stigma. So who is raising awareness? Who is promoting Self-Harm Awareness Day? And there are some major players regarding tackling self-harm and informing others what self-harm or self-injury actually is. Although I've no links to them myself, but I felt that it's important to let those of you in the video know what sites they could check up on. And the first that springs to mind is actually Life Signs. And now they've been very busy. I've been watching their site, and they've been very busy raising awareness about self-injury since around about, from what I've saw of their site, since 2002. And they're actually quite grateful for those who blog about self-harm and help raise awareness or the understanding of what self-harm is. Life Signs is run by volunteers who have experienced self-injury themselves. So, please check out their sites. It's www.lifesigns.org.uk, and I've seen quite a few of their videos. subscribe to their YouTube channel, have a listen, have a watch, and you might learn something quite useful. Those videos are quite good. Next up is Self Harm UK. That site is www.selfharm.co.uk, and basically it's a project dedicated to supporting young people who have been impacted by self-harm. And what this organisation does is provide at least a safe place to talk about it. It helps if people can talk about what they're going through. I've seen some general mental health awareness sites that also try and tackle the situation about self-harm. A good site I've come across, which is geared towards young people, it's called Young Minds, which has more information trying to dispel the myths regarding self-harm, and you can check out their site www.youngminds.org.uk. Go through their campaigns and you should see Self-Harm Awareness Day pop up. Now, Young Minds is one of the UK's leading charity committed to improving the well-being and mental health of young people. I've also seen a few good blogs that I've visited or come across that help tackle the issue of self-harm. And a good one that I've come across is actually one called Freedom from Harm. The site address is freedomfromharm, it's all one word.com, and basically they were set up I think around 2015 for those looking for support around self-harm and eating disorders actually as well. And again, this blog's worth checking out. I'll give one last mention to another site which is called Harmless, and that site is www.harmless.org.uk. and be aware, if you're watching this video within a few years' times, these sites might change, the site address might change, so be aware of that. Usually the best place is you can always just go to Google and type the name of the organization just in case. Well, basically Harmless was set up I think around 2007. It's a voluntary organization for those who self-harm, and provide support not only for those who self-harm but their friends as well, and even for professionals. So it's a site that's that encompasses different perspectives, which is, I think, is very important. There should be space for other people to at least talk about how they've experienced self-harm and how they try to support those who've self-harmed, and also encompass medical professionals as well. So, okay, let's say, for instance, you want to raise awareness about self-harm or self-injury. What can you do for the 1st of March? And be aware this happens on the 1st of March each year, so you might not be able to do anything this time around. But usually what people tend to do is they could always write a letter or email movers and shakers in society, like your MP or mental health champion, about what self-harm means to you. You could also query what are they doing to tackle the issue of self-harm. Other things you can do is, if you are a mental health champion or a self-harm survivor or a carer or someone suffering or going through self-harm, don't have to be suffering, you could also raise awareness by appearing on TV or speaking on the radio about your experience of self-harm, or even attend a self-harm event that raise awareness about self-harm, or even hold an event about self-harm. We could show your support by wearing a particular clothing, the colour for Self-Harm Awareness Day is actually orange. So I've seen people wear shirts and armbands. You can also do what I've done. Some people might blog about Self-Harm Awareness Day. Others have produced videos. So what if you're a friend or a carer of someone who's suffering or actually going through self-harm? Remember, it's not always suffering. Some people might actually do this as a life choice, oddly enough. You don't have to agree with what I say about self-harm or self-injury. Remember, please visit those sites. Make up your own mind. Now, usually I tend to try and focus on how a carer can support those who self-harm. But I'm going to try and change things around a bit. I'm going to try and switch things. I'm going to give some tips instead on how you can support yourself as a carer. Now, the first thing that I would like to know is, do not feel guilty about the situation. Sometimes being a mental health carer, you can feel almost powerless. You desperately want to just get the person to stop harming themselves. You just want them to put down whatever they're using, and you just don't want them to hurt themselves anymore. And this can be so difficult. I can guess that there's carers out there that will be shouting and screaming at the person, saying, why are you doing this? This is just harming yourself. You're not doing yourself any good. It's a very tricky issue. But I'll always say to yourself, just don't blame yourself. Just take things in your stride and do what you can do. Next thing is, which I feel is really important actually, is get clued up about what self-harm, what self-injury actually is, or what it could be for yourself. I mean, I've mentioned quite a few sites, and I know there's more floating around, so I can have mentioned those. Ask around. Obviously, there's things you'll agree with, and there's things that you'll query, and there's information that you think, that just can't be possible. There can't be the right information regarding self-harm or self-injury. But I'll always say information is power, and it's free enough. It doesn't take too long to just type in self-harm awareness through Google, or ask a GP if you feel that whoever you're caring for is a sufferer or is going through self-harm or self-injury. And again, I mentioned, feel free to disagree with what you might come across. Disagree with me if you feel, I'm talking gibberish. I don't mind. But what I feel is important is that you can at least take the time to seek information. The third piece of advice that I offer to a carer, a mental health carer supporting those who are going through self-harm, self-injury, is get support for yourself. Join carers groups, mental health carers forums. Get support for yourself. Feel that you can find a space to talk about your experience of trying to support your loved one who's going through self-harm, self-injury. And I think the last thing I can come up with is just don't cope in isolation, which is quite related to what I've just said about joining groups. But also say, speak to close friends, give them a call, give family members a call if need be, when supporting someone going through self-harm can actually get tough. Relationships regarding how you support your loved one or a friend or a neighbor or someone you've come across self-harming can be difficult. It's not plain sailing. And remember, we're all different. So what works for someone else might not be what is best for us. So again, as I mentioned before, please check up on those sites that I've mentioned, and I'd just like to say have a happy self-harm awareness day. Thank you for watching.